Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm going to give us a couple more minutes for the last few people to trickle in. But for everybody who's already here, welcome to Developer Days. This is the communications API track. And while we're just waiting for people to join to get started, if everybody could go and make sure they're signed up for a Dolby IO account if they haven't signed up already. And two, sign up or sign into their GitHub accounts and Netlify accounts. That's going to be great. That's going to be really helpful because our workshop will be using some of that stuff to demo our API functionality. But in the meantime, just give everybody a couple more minutes to join in. And while that's happening, actually, now's a good time to do a little bit of Livestorm housekeeping. So for anybody who's unfamiliar, welcome to this platform. It's Livestorm. In the bottom right corner, you're going to see a couple of different tabs that you can click on, including a chat feature and a questions feature. So feel free to use the chat feature to send any messages, ask any questions, interact with anybody who's in the workshop. And you can also use the questions tab. And typically I recommend asking your questions in the questions tab, just because it helps us and our team kind of get back to you with a bit more of like a formatted response. So you don't have to feel like you're scrolling up through all of the messages trying to find where you asked the question and what the response was. Additionally, we also have the ability to react. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see a bar with a few different settings, including a react setting. Every now and then as we're going through, I might ask people to react just, because I'm here presenting to a bunch of nameless faces. So it's really nice to see a little bit of interaction from everybody. And so we'll give it a few more minutes. Out of curiosity, is anybody joining from the previous workshop with Griffin on media APIs?
It looks like Giuseppe joined us from the previous workshop.
Great to have you. I mean, that's perfect. They're probably very familiar now with the whole how Livestorm works and all that good stuff. Well, it looks like we've probably got everybody who's going to join. So I'm going to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Developer Days communication track. My name's Braden Riggs, and I'm joined here with Dan Zeitman and Michelle Gong, who are both going to be here helping answer your questions, as well as interacting with the chat and relaying anything to me. So again, for this workshop, we're kind of relying on the fact that everybody here has a little bit of an understanding already of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Now, it's okay if you aren't super confident with these languages. It will just help for the flow of the workshop. But there's still plenty here if you're not from a technical background to learn about our APIs and our tools. Additionally, we're going to need everybody here to make sure that they have a Dolby IO account ready, as well as that they're signed up or signed into a GitHub account and a Netlify account. Now, it's not required, but if you do have a code editor of your choice ready, that will be helpful as well. Because as we're going through and looking at some of the code and some of the API functionalities, it'll be helpful if you want to, scroll and look at a certain section or maybe make some changes yourself and test them out. So if everybody is all good there, can I get some thumbs up reactions from the participants? There we go. Wonderful. Again, it's super helpful for me to gauge where everybody's at. So I do appreciate the everybody reacting. Cool. So a little bit about me. My name's Braden Riggs. I'm a developer advocate with the Dolby IO team. And I'm available not just in this workshop. So you'll see at the bottom of all these slides, I include my Twitter handle. If at any point you want to reach out and dive in a bit deeper on the APIs outside of the workshop, Or if you have any questions or want me to connect you with people that can answer your questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Or at the end of this presentation, I'll link to a bunch of other useful resources for getting started with our communications API and our support network and everything like that. Cool. So a little bit about the agenda today, or kind of what our goals are for this workshop. We kind of have three main aims for this workshop. The first one is we want to be able to launch our own video conferencing app. That's actually going to be the first thing we're doing. The second one is we're going to want to learn about how the Voxy Web SDK works. Now, this is a good time to note the use of the word Voxy. So the Dolby I/O family is big. It includes a lot of different products. So whenever you see Voxy, that's relating to our communications APIs. And this comes up a couple of times in our code, and I'll point them out. But for everybody's reference, just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. And additionally, our third goal for the workshop is to explore some of the tools that makes Dolby I/O unique and why you might want to use it for your communications solutions. Cool. So again, one last time before we dive into our agenda item number one, we are going to need all three of these accounts. So if everybody's all signed up for these accounts and ready, please drop some thumbs up in chat. Happy to give it a couple minutes in case anybody is stuck on any of the stages. Feel free to just write in chat if you're running into any issues or anything. All right, well, I'm seeing some thumbs up. So it looks like it is time to get started. So I'm going to want everybody to navigate over to GitHub. I'll drop the GitHub link in chat. And this is our workshop repository. Share my screen. Wonderful. So if everybody navigates over to this repo, we can proceed with the workshop. So the first thing I want to point out is this repo is on our dolby.io-samples GitHub account. Now, even though we're doing the workshop from here, this samples account includes tons of useful code demos for a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about in here. And sometimes these are standalone apps that you can launch and see how they work, or parts of workshops like this one, or even things relating to our blog content, which I can show everybody as we get later in the workshop. But for this particular workshop, we're just going to be navigating to this one, the comms getting started page. So if you're here, the first thing that you're going to want to do is scroll down. Now, this repo includes written instructions of what I'm about to tell you. So if you're more of a reading person, feel free to read through, but don't go too far ahead because there are kind of a few little gotchas with this. But the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to navigate over to our Dolby I/O account that you either already have or have just made. In my case, I already have an account, so I'm just going to log in. Great. So this is our Dolby I/O dashboard. It's just going to take a second to load. But this is kind of the main place that you're going to want to navigate to whenever using our APIs. Now, as you can see, you have the account credits section, which summarizes how many credits you have remaining on your account. If you're using the free tier, which I'm using in this example, it kind of tells you how many you've got remaining in terms of dollar amounts, as well as offers a bonus if you sign up using your credit card. Additionally, down here, we include all of our applications. So if you've just made an account, you're probably just going to see one on there, My First App. However, as you build different demos, you're going to want to keep track of them by creating new applications. So for this demo, I'm going to add a new app. I'm just going to call it Workshop. Feel free to call it whatever you want and create it, which will take a second. So as you can see, we now have a workshop application down here, which we can click on, and it will take us over to our API keys. Now, if you were joining from Griffin's track earlier, you would have been using the media APIs. However, for this particular track, we want to use our communications APIs, of which we'll have two. We have a consumer key and a consumer secret. So leave these up on another page and return back over to our GitHub instructions. So from here, we're going to want to scroll down here and click the Deploy to Netlify button. I recommend opening this in another tab so that you're able to go back to the instructions as we proceed. Great. So from here, you're going to be delivered to this page here, to which you're going to have the option to connect to GitHub. So we're going to click the Connect to GitHub button. You'll get an extra page. I've already connected my GitHub to the account. If you haven't connected, you might see a couple extra steps there where you have to authorize Netlify to connect to your GitHub. So when we're in here, you're going to see the name of our repository, which is going to get created when we hit the Save and Deploy button here. Now you can keep it this name. You can add your own name to it. For example, I might just call this Workshop as well, so I know how to keep track of it. And then Netlify is going to ask us for two things, our consumer key and our consumer secret key. So if we go back to our Dolby I/O dashboard and have a look at our communications APIs, we can see a consumer key here and a consumer secret. So we're going to want to go ahead and copy over the consumer key into the first one, and we're going to hit Show Secret and copy over the consumer key to the second one. Once this is all done, we can click the Save and Deploy button. Now, what Netlify is it is a serverless, like cloud environment that allows us to host many little web apps on it. So what it's doing right now is it's actually deploying everything that's in this GitHub repository here into its own little serverless function, which we can access for the purposes of this demo. Now, while it's doing that, it's going to take a few minutes. So I'm going to give you some quick housekeeping tips for Netlify.
Yeah, Braden, quick question. So what's actually happening to the repo itself? Is that getting copied somewhere?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. So right now, the repo is hosted on our Dolby I/O samples. And the reason we had to connect our GitHub account to Netlify is because what it's doing is it's taking the repository from Dolby I/O samples and cloning it to our own GitHub accounts. So this way we have our own copy of it, which we can make modifications to and play around with during this demo. And that way you kind of have like your own version of the web app that we're about to see here.
Oh, cool. So that means after that, I'd be able to go to that repo, pull it down and edit it in VS Code or however I want to edit and continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're going to see kind of throughout this workshop here, there'll be a couple opportunities where you can play around with that code and see what happens or make your own changes and stuff like that. So if everybody has gotten to this stage here, where they're looking at a Netlify screen and they see a randomly generated name and this URL underneath with their randomly generated name, can everybody send me a thumbs up react? And again, feel free if anybody is running into any speed bumps here to let us know in chat, because I can go back and recreate these steps to show you maybe where we're slowing down a little bit. Cool. Well, it looks like I'm seeing some thumbs up, which is great. It means everybody has made it to this stage. So from here, everybody's going to have their own URL, which they can click on, which will launch their very first web app. How cool is that, right? So what we're seeing here is we're seeing all that code from the original Dolby I/O samples repository now hosted as a serverless web conferencing function. Now, there are a few different things going on here. So the first thing is your name, which we can enter or change for the purposes of joining a video call. Additionally, we also have a conferencing alias, dev portal. So you can think of this as like a meeting room ID when you use a different or a more commercialized form of a video conferencing app. Now, our purposes of this is just for a demo. So it's a little bare bones, but it's kind of more meant to be a proof of concept of what you can build and what we're going to learn how to build over the course of this workshop. Additionally, we have this switch for Dolby Voice, which we can turn on and off. By default, it is on. Now, we're going to get more into what Dolby Voice actually does. But for now, we can just think of it as a built-in feature that helps improve the quality of the overall conferencing experience. So you can think like it removes things like background noise and helps make sure that everybody's not using too much of their bandwidth to be on the video call. So from there, we can hit the join button, to which we'll get prompted by the web applications to whether we use our camera and our microphone. And there, as you can see, I'm now in my own video conference. Now, by default, when you join these conferences, we have the audio put on mute automatically. And that's just because as we have people join, we don't want all of this crazy noise happening. But what I can actually do now is I can share this link in our chat, and other people can come through and join this web application. Now, you don't have to come and join and jump on. I know Dan might jump on to kind of demonstrate that we do actually have a video conferencing app working here. But it's a pretty cool little proof of concept as to the kind of conferencing app that you can build. And there we go. We see Dan has joined. If we weren't in a live storm conference right now, we could unmute and talk to each other, have our meeting, do all that fun stuff. But because I am also streaming this live at the same time, I maybe won't unmute because we'll start getting double voices and all that sort of stuff. Now, some of the other features included in this web app of note and that we'll kind of learn to include is the ability to stop our video if we don't want our video on there, or enable our video again. Additionally, we can start our audio, and once our audio is started, we can then mute it again. We can also do some stuff like screen sharing. So what I can do here is I can share my screen if it's gonna work for me. My computer's doing a lot of work right now. It's jumping between hosting a live stream as well as running its own video conferencing app and a few of the other code things that we're going to be doing in the background. In the meantime, actually, while I'm having some technical trouble here, Dan, if you don't mind for a second, do you think you could share your screen and walk everybody through some of the features included in the web app?
Yeah, absolutely. Give me 1 second and I'll catch up with you.
Appreciate it.
Oh, no worries. So, right. And we will share this screen. All righty. So you should see both of us in the web application. Thumbs up if you all can see that. I know we've had some connectivity issues at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and start a screen share. Let me find something suitable for that. A screen share in a screen share is kind of interesting. So we shall do this one. There we go. And so you can see my mouse moving around. We can stop the screen share. We can also hit start recording. And what's going to happen there is the recording is going to get recorded. So it's capturing both my stream and Braden's stream. If I went back to that screen share again, it would also show that screen. And then eventually, once we stop that screen share and stop the recording, it would go back, and it only works when the session is finally ended is when we have the recording available shortly. Now that was set up with Braden's account, so therefore it's tied to his API keys.
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump back in here. My Chrome started responding again. But thank you for giving everybody the tour of that, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
So if I go back to sharing my screen here, we can see I'm back at the GitHub. Now, as we just finished that recording, we can actually return to our dashboard. We can go over to our workshop application here, and we can click on Communications APIs. Now, this is kind of a really useful part of the dashboard. We can monitor things like our usage or how many minutes we've been using in it. We can check out things like, when we just ran our last conference. Specifically here, we can see all of our recordings. We have this recording here, which is the one that Dan just took from our meeting that we had. And we can also play around with some of the settings. And this is useful for stuff like having your own custom recording layouts, as well as output formats. You can add notifications so that you get notifications if people are joining your conference or using your API keys, webhooks, security, as well as setting maximum duration for your conferences. And of course, we're continuing to develop this product. So you can also enroll in our open beta program and get access to some of the cool stuff that we're working on a little bit before it's ready for actual deployment. And additionally, from the dashboard, you can actually test your API keys using this conference button. And again, I won't demo that on here, but for anybody curious, feel free to test that out there. Cool. So just a quick check-in on everybody. Has anybody run into any issues? Was everybody able to get their own apps up and running? And does anybody have any questions at this stage? Feel free to drop them in the chat, drop them in the questions tab, or send some reactions my way. Yeah, I'm seeing some thumbs up. So I'm going to assume that everybody has been able to launch their own conferencing app, to which I'll say, congratulations. You actually just made your first call with our API keys and were able to launch your own conferencing solution. Now, the first question you probably have is, okay, that's cool, conferencing app, but how does it work? Well, for this section of the workshop, I'm going to walk you through a little bit of code from the perspective of our GitHub. So if you go back to the GitHub here, you can see we have all the instructions down here, as well as where we deployed the Netlify app. However, up here is kind of the brain of the operation. Now we include 5 files here. These 5 files are just for GitHub Netlify related stuff. They're not necessarily important or related to our APIs. As well as the README file. The 2 directories that we're interested in exploring is the functions directory, which we'll talk about everything in here, and the website directory, or the www directory. Now, if we navigate into the www directory, we're going to see 3 things. We're going to see some HTML, we're going to see our scripts, and we're going to see our assets. Now, for anybody who's not super familiar with how HTML and JavaScript works, we can think of the index file as like the skeleton of our web app. It's the part that sort of keeps everything together, lets the website know where we should insert videos, where we should share our screen to, where the control panel should be. Additionally, we have our scripts. And you can imagine scripts as like the brain of the operation. It includes 2 JavaScript files, which we'll get to talking about in a second. And that kind of does all the functionality or all the interactions related to the app. And then we have the assets. And the assets is a whole bunch of stuff. You don't really need to worry about it. We're not going to talk about too much because the assets are kind of like the skin of the conferencing app. It is all the cosmetic stuff, from all the nice colors to the images that we have in there, and isn't super important to using our API. However, if you do have some specific questions about it, we are happy to answer them, of course, and talk more about it if you do find it interesting. Now, this is kind of like the general file format for a lot of our sample applications, which you can find at Dolby.io samples. Alternatively, you can actually head over to docs.dolby.io, which is where we include all of our documentation for using our APIs. Specifically, here's the landing page for docs. And you can see we have our communications API section here and our media API section here. So again, for all the stuff we're covering in our workshop, we're interested in this stuff here. But we also have extra things like a project gallery, which includes some sampled projects, as well as a bit of literature relating to the theory behind, why we might want to have like an is speaking thing included in our sample application, or why or how we might want to add some audio effects such as spatial audio. We also include a developer blog, which can range from anything from like how-to guides to talking about more specific high-level concepts, to even teaching about some audio terminology and some of the defects that you might get in your audio. And then, of course, our events and webinars, which some of you might have even used to hear about this webinar. Cool. But from here, we can go either do the getting started page for the communications API, which you can see drops us off here and walks us through building our own demo application. Or you can jump to specific things, like if you're using the web SDK, which we are in this case, you can go have a look at overviews, getting started guides, the API reference, or even some of our extra stuff that we've included in there. Additionally, we also include stuff relating to our platform. So as we mentioned before, Dolby Voice, right, is one of the things that we could adjust on our web conferencing app. So if you want to learn more about that, that's here, as well as things like security best practices, which is also really helpful if you are interested in building your own web conferencing app. So if we navigate back to the code, we can jump in and have a look at our HTML file. Now, if you're familiar with HTML, this isn't going to look too crazy, but if you aren't familiar, don't worry. There's a lot of repeating patterns in HTML, and I'm just going to kind of point out a few of the key things. So the first key thing we have here is we have all of our styling, which is everything that uses that assets folder with all of the different CSS that kind of make our app look pretty and nice to use, as well as a few different assets included from the internet. And additionally, we have our own style sheet, which is one that we built for some more specific or nuanced changes that we wanted to make to our web conferencing app. The next really interesting thing that I want to point out here is where we import the JavaScript files. So the first thing that we want to import is we want to import this Voxy web SDK. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the Voxy is kind of like the name of the product that is our communications APIs. So if you see this, don't worry, you're not importing some random SDK from somewhere. It is our Dolby.io related tool. And then as we saw in the scripts file a little bit earlier, we import the first part of the brain of how our web app works. Now, it's really important that we import the UI.js before we import the client.js, which was the other file in that folder. We'll point that out here. So it's important that we import the UI.js before the client.js. Now, in fact, when we import the client.js, we do it at the very bottom of our web page. And this is because we want all of the HTML to load in before we import this last JavaScript. Now I'm going to show you why we want to do that, right? So the client.js is like the event handler. When we pull it in, it then starts listening to what your users or what you are going to be doing on your web app, whether you're going to be trying to join the web app or whether or not you've already joined and you're going to be trying to leave, we need to have some script ready to be listening for these kinds of events. And we can see that here. There's three main things that happen in a video conference that we want to be listening to. We want to be listening to if a stream is added, and a stream can be audio or video or both. We also want to listen to if a stream is updated, i.e. somebody is just in the conference with audio and they turn on their video. Or we want to listen to if a stream is removed, being, all right, if somebody is in the conference and then leaves, or if they have their audio and video on and they turn their video off. So we need to listen to all that stuff. Additionally, we also need to include a location to our token server. So what is a token server? Well, if we jump back out into the main directory of our function right on the landing page, we go to the Functions tab, to which we include a token generator. Now, as you saw with the Netlify app, we copied our API keys and we included them in the landing page to Netlify as we launched our app. Now, the thing about your API keys is they tie the usage of our video conferencing applications, or the video conferencing application that you build, to your account. Now, we do give trial credits, but the service isn't free. So for more production-ready deployments, you don't want to expose your API keys to anybody that might be using the app that you're trying to build. And this is because they could then use your API keys for their own projects and potentially run up a bill. Now, there's a bunch of different solutions to this, and I really recommend checking out the security best practices if you're interested in learning more. One such solution is creating a token server, or an OAuth 2 token server. Now, what a token server does is it obfuscates the API keys that you're using from the end user, instead replacing them with a expendable token that will expire after a certain amount of time. In this case, it's 3,600 seconds or 1 hour. Now, in a normal production-ready application, your token server wouldn't be hosted on the same function that hosts your web app. For simplicity of this demo, we wanted to just keep them connected together. But what our web application does is it actually queries this token generator for a token, which it can then be used to connect up to our APIs. So this way, the end user or the person that is using our web application can't go in and access our API keys and use them for their own projects. Instead, they can access the token. The token is only valid for an hour, and in our case, for our application, will be refreshed every 30 minutes. Now, part of what allows this to be secure is that our token server only accepts post requests, i.e., it can only send the token to our web application. I can't go fetch the token from our web application. And so that way you're not having somebody generate a bunch of tokens without your permission. So if we head back to the client.js file, we can see that we link up our token server to our main server. And this is for all kinds of authentication reasons, which allow us to actually use our web application. Some of the other stuff in the client.js file worth noting is at the top, we assign everybody one of the names of the Avengers when they automatically get in there. This way, people that don't input their own name for the web application will just be assigned one, and this is done randomly. So if you're wondering what is all this stuff up at the top, that's what it's used for. Then again, as we mentioned before, we have all of our event handlers for the 3 different events we want to listen to, which is stream added, stream updated, and stream removed. And then we have our token, right, where we refresh our token and we initialize the Voxy SDK with our token. So this is for all kinds of authentication reasons. Once we've initialized the SDK, we can then use all of its functionality to start video conferences and share videos and audios. So we use the token to authenticate that. As well as we include a refresh token function down here, which replaces the token when it's about 50% expired. So in our case, we have it set to expire every hour. So it's going to replace the token every 30 minutes. Now, the reason why we want to put this file at the very bottom of our HTML is because we want to wait for all of the HTML to put everything in place before we start listening to events and before we start creating tokens. And this is because before the HTML is loaded in, if it's already listening to events, it could potentially be listening to the wrong things. And this is because if the HTML hasn't loaded in, nobody has any buttons to click on or any way to join the conference. So we want to make sure that all of those features cosmetically load in before we then import the client.js file. Now, additionally, in the HTML file, we also include containers for our video devices, our audio devices, for things like sharing screens. And that's all pretty standard just in terms of like HTML etiquette. And again, if anybody has any specific questions about it, we can focus more on it. However, from here, I want to jump into kind of the bulk of the web app, which is the UI.js. So this function here includes, or this file here includes all of the functions that allow our web app to work. Now, of course, the first function that we're interested in is how we actually create a conference. Now, as you can see, we include a join button in our HTML. And what we're going to do is when that join button is clicked, we want to create a session. And then we want whoever clicked that button to join the session. So in this case, how you would do it is you would first start by opening a session with the voxy.sdk and including a name of the person that is opening that session. So again, if you have just randomly joined the conference and you haven't added yourself or you haven't input a name, it's just going to use one of the Avengers names. So that's the first thing we do is we open the conference. The second thing we want to do is we want to define the conference parameters. So we have a recording feature. So we want to include live recording. And then we also have a couple of other settings here. We won't go into too much detail about these, but this relates to the codecs used to transport the video and the quality that it's shared at, and are usually adjusted depending on the user's particular bandwidth. And then we also include a function here called Dolby Voice. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, Dolby Voice is kind of like a better conferencing experience if enabled. It does things like noise suppression, helps reduce the bandwidth load on your app, as well as a plethora of other things, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So we define our conference parameters, and we also want to define our conference options. Now, to do this, we set an alias being the name of the conference or the conference room. So if you remember back to our app that we just launched, it just defaults to being like dev workshop. And then we also include the conference parameters that we defined here. And with all those settings configured, we can then create the conference using all these conference options that we just created. And once we have a conference created, we can then have the person who clicked the join button join the conference. Now, as I mentioned before, we just have the audio default turned off in the case of the workshop. And this is because if we did have a bunch of people join it, it can be really chaotic with a bunch of people coming in, not necessarily knowing that their mics are on. I'm sure everybody is used to having that happen in meetings, and it can be a little frustrating. But we do have everybody join with their video turned on. Now, one cool, I guess, piece of homework for anybody following along here is if you do want to come play around with this, you can jump in here and mess around with the settings, see what happens if you keep audio on and you turn off video, and what does that look like in the web app? Or you can play around with some of this stuff here. What does the web app sound like without Dolby Voice? Or if I use a different video codec, or if I turn live recording off. So that's some interesting stuff to play around with. So we define our join options. In this case, again, joining without audio, but joining with video turned on. And then we join the conference using the conference ID, which we created when we created our conference, and the join options that we just defined. Now, of course, just joining a meeting isn't a super useful experience. We actually want to include a bunch of functionality so the user can control how they interact with the conference. Now, the first thing we want to do to allow for this is we have that control panel on the side. We want to start by removing the name input, because we don't want to worry about people adding their name in at this stage. We do want to remove the join button, which we do using some CSS to hide that button, which we can talk about more if everybody has questions about that. But for now, I'll keep moving on. But we want to add a leave button, as well as we want to add a bunch of navigation settings. So this is stuff relating to, all right, like, do we need to have a start audio button in there? Do we need to have a stop audio button in there? As well as start video buttons, stop video buttons, screen sharing, recording, all of that fun stuff. And so this is just kind of a way of like, all right, when somebody does successfully join this conference, all of these things are enabled. Now, this is the actual functionality for something like a leave button. So again, we've seen the process for joining a conference. The process for leaving a conference is even easier, right? All we're doing is, because we already have our conference ID, is just calling a leave function where we close the section and we remove or reset all of the UI elements. Another good example of this is the start video button. So we want to add the functionality that allows people to start their video. Well, it's the same thing. We use the participant ID for the session, which was defined when you joined the session. And we start video, or we call the start video function. And then again, we update the UI with the changes. So we remove the start video button because our video is started, and we add a stop video button so that we can stop the video. And we see this pattern repeated all the way through this document. So even though it's a big document, it's a lot of just UI functionality that's going on here. Again, stop video function is just the opposite of the start video. Rather than calling start video, we call stop video. And rather than removing or using the CSS to hide the start video button, we instead just remove the CSS that was hiding the start video button so that people can click it again, and then hide the stop video button. And we see this process repeated pretty continuously. Things like screen sharing, where we start and stop. Well, we just call the screen share function, and then we just update the UI. Same with recording and all that stuff. At this point, does anybody have any questions?
We don't have any questions in the chat, but in terms of calling out, understanding the API a little more, can you show us where in the docs it goes through some of these functions like start, stop?
Yeah, that's great. So if everybody remember, I took them over to docs.dolby.io, which we can see here. And I'll go back to that and I'll walk everybody straight through to where they can find this stuff. So again, we want to go down to the communications.api, and we can start by clicking overview, which will kind of just take us to the page where everything's at. Now we're interested in the web SDK. So again, we have overview where we can talk about some of those things I just mentioned, such as initializing or adding recordings or inviting participants. We have some getting started stuff if you want a more hands-on example. And then we have the reference, right? Now the reference includes pretty much all of the functionality of the SDK. So for example, the Voxeat SDK function that we import, it includes all the stuff like creating conferences and what that looks like. Or if a conference is created, we can look at conference service. where it includes all of the functions that we might want to use in our video app, such as creating or joining or starting, stopping, etc.
Oh, so that's awesome. It looks like things like kicking a user off and stuff is just a matter of adding one of those functions, a little UI to make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the SDK handles a lot of the complicated stuff, and really what's left to the user is just to string it all together in a way that is intuitive for the end user. So if anybody's interested, I will drop a link to that in the chat in case anybody wants to have a closer look at some of the functions. But we can see this process is repeated a lot through this UI.js file. And sorry, Dan, did you want to add something?
No, I was just curious. I noticed we had the setup to turn Dolby Voice on and off. Maybe a little more expansion on what Dolby Voice is. We've got about 10, 15 minutes left. So
yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. So yeah, Dolby Voice, right? We've heard it mentioned a couple of times. What is Dolby Voice and why is it interesting? Well, Dolby Voice takes a lot of that amazing, like magical Dolby technology that has been a staple in the audio industry for a number of years and kind of puts it in the hands of developers, right? So a lot of that technology that makes the cinema experience amazing can also be translated over to the conferencing experience or any kind of virtual environment that you want to create. So Dolby Voice is just a Boolean feature that you can turn on and off. And it includes features such as like dynamic audio leveling so that one person in your conference doesn't sound 10 times louder than another. Advanced spatial audio, which we'll talk more about separately in a second. Noise and echo reduction, as well as things like optimized bandwidth utilization. So people who are calling without stable internet connections can have a bit more of a better experience. As well as some fun back-end technology that makes the whole conferencing experience a little bit more resilient to interruptions from different guests. Now, what Dolby Voice actually does is probably best explained by showing what the typical experience is. So when you normally join a video conference or you join a video conference without Dolby Voice enabled, audio streams are just kind of spat out at the listeners, right? So as you can see in the diagram here, if you have three people who are all talking, those three streams of audio are just deposited as three streams to the end listener. Now this contrasts to Dolby Voice, where instead the audio streams are blended together. And when blending all of these audio streams together, you get cool stuff like audio leveling so that somebody doesn't sound way too loud, as well as like noise reduction and reducing noise for specific users. And then that's output to the listener as a single stream. And this way it, one, uses less bandwidth, but two, is a more seamless experience for the end user because that way they are, not listening to competing audio streams as much as they're listening to one audio stream that have blended all the original ones in there. Now, enabling Dolby Voice, as we saw before, is as simple as just adjusting the Boolean value or turning it to true. And you can play around with the experience using the web app that we just created in case you want to listen to it for yourself. Now, another really cool feature about having Dolby Voice enabled is the ability to use spatial audio. Now, if you're not familiar with spatial audio, it is the experience of sound coming from all around you instead of just from the left or just from the right. And this experience mimics real life a lot more. If somebody was standing 20 feet behind me talking, the experience is that I get that audio as if it was coming from behind me 20 feet back. Now, why would you want to include spatial audio in your web app? Well, there's a number of really cool AR, VR, metaverse opportunities, but just even in the standard video conferencing, having spatial audio allows for a much more compelling experience for the people actually using the web conferencing app. And by compelling, I mean, as we saw before, we have a lot of competing audio streams, especially in terms of examples where Dolby Voice is turned off. Now, when you turn Dolby Voice on, they're blended into one stream, which means they're not competing anymore. However, without spatial audio, those streams are still just coming from the left or the right, which can be good, but perhaps a more compelling experience in a video conferencing example is that if somebody who was to your left, right, and up a little bit starts sounding like they're to your left and up a little bit, or to your right and up a little bit. And this is really good because it means that in a conference where people are constantly talking over each other or interrupting each other, they have the ability to blend the streams in a more seamless way that our body is, naturally evolved for listening to audio from different places and different angles, rather than just having it spat straight into our headphones. Now, enabling spatial audio in your conference is a little bit more of an evolved experience. We're going to see why here. So the first thing we need to do is turn on Dolby Voice. So we start blending these audio streams. Then we want to create our conference. And when joining the conference, we want to make sure that spatial audio is enabled. Right? So this means that the individual that's joining the conference has let the conference know that they want their audio to be processed in a spatial way, to which we can then join the conference. Now, of course, defining to a computer the spatial layout that you want becomes quite an interesting process, because in the world of computers and this conferencing app, what is left and right, up and down, forward and backwards? Well, this stuff actually needs to be defined by the user. So it needs to be defined by the developer that's creating the product. So what the developer needs to do is they need to define a forward direction, an up direction, and a right direction, which they can use using 3 parameters, X, Y, and Z. If we actually go back to that diagram really quickly, you can see one representation of it, where the greater X becomes, or the more X increases in the positive direction, the more to the right somebody is going to sound, right? And as Y decreases, the more forward or in front of the user the person is going to sound. And of course, this is a 2D example. 3D examples add the whole Z direction to it. So you can actually create an experience where you'd be emulating somebody like sitting up on a balcony talking, and what that might sound to somebody who's kind of over at the bottom of the at another balcony somewhere across the building, and how that would sound, which you can define when you define your forward, up, and right directions. Now, additionally, it's hard to communicate to the computer what scale is, so we need to do it ourselves. Now, in the real world, if somebody is too far away, say like 100 meters, you're not going to be able to hear them. Of course, what is a meter in the digital space? Well, that's up to you. So using our APIs, we define the hearing limit as 100 meters. And how long a meter is defined as can be controlled by the developer. So in this case, we're using an example where a screen is 5,000 pixels wide. And we want somebody who sits on the periphery of one edge of the screen and the periphery of another edge of the screen to just barely be able to hear each other, because they're a little less than 5,000 pixels away from each other. So what this conversion ends up looking like is 5,000 divided by 100, 50. So that means every 50 pixels traveled in any direction on the screen is equal to traveling 1 meter in terms of your ability to hear. Now, again, we would use all these parameters, the forward, up, and right that we've defined, as well as the scale, to set the spatial environment for the conference. So this means that when we're creating the conference, we have this world that we've fabricated in which this value means up, and this value translates to being this far away, and etc. And so when somebody is then joining the conference, we can pick a location for them to hear everything from. So again, in this case, if we're using the value of 50 pixels being 1 meter, if we have somebody at X0, Y0, and Z0, they're going to sound 8 meters away in the X direction and 6 meters away in the Y direction as it as you hear it in. And of course, these values can be dynamically updated if you want to have a conference where, say, you can control your person to move around and to hear from different directions. Or it can be static if you just have a web conferencing app where somebody joins and they're assigned a spatial hearing location. So let's recap, because that's been a ton of stuff across this little workshop. So a few kind of key takeaways is we launched our own video conferencing app, which was powered by the Comms Web SDK. We explored how to structure a basic conferencing app and some of the things people come to expect, such as sharing screens or stopping their audio. We learned about where the I/O documentation is, the Dolby I/O documentation is, and how to use it. We learned a little bit about API key security and token servers. We explored how to start a video conference and add video, audio, share screens. And then we had an overview of what Dolby Voice is and what spatial audio is. So I want to thank everybody for listening to me present for an hour. Of course, if anybody has any questions at all, we still have a few minutes, so drop them in chat. In the meantime, we include a survey, and if you fill out the survey, you go into a raffle to win one of our Dolby I/O t-shirts, in case you want a free t-shirt. And I've also included here some links to our documentation, to our blog, to our support channel in case you run into any issues, and of course to my Twitter if anybody is mulling this over in a couple hours and has a specific question. And really, we're trying to make it as much as possible where, we helped you out in this workshop, but really our docs are super useful, and so are our blogs for getting started here. So don't feel like you are unable to work it out yourself. And yeah, any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, it's the workshop.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being online and checking out the workshop. Definitely fill out that survey. It's a good opportunity for us to learn more about how you felt about the workshop, as well as getting feedback for future ones. We're really excited about hearing from you on that. And you get some Dolby swag if you happen to be the name drawing on that.
Yeah, who doesn't love an extra t-shirt? Yeah, otherwise, everything that we talked about in the workshop here can all be found on our Dolby IO-samples repository on GitHub, specifically our workshop one, which I'll drop in chat one more time in case anybody is looking to look over the code of how the actual web conferencing app is started. Otherwise, everybody who followed along should have their Netlify servers up, and they can go grab their friends or coworkers and try it out themselves and see what the conferencing experience is like. And there's tons of cool stuff. We focused on conferencing experiences specifically, but the scope of different things you can build with these communication APIs is incredible. We recently ran a hackathon back in November where we encourage people to think of some cool out-of-the-box ideas. And you really do see some great ideas come up with handling this whole virtual meeting experience, as well as some really out-of-the-box use cases for our APIs. So if anybody's interested in that, let us know and we can talk about some of the cool projects there.
Well, awesome, Brayden. I guess it's time we can wrap it up.
Yeah. So. Sounds good.
Awesome. I will end the stream then.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And again, don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.